All right, I like that. All right, everybody, welcome. Happy Saturday. It's really a pleasure to be sitting at the table, virtually or in person, with you all. My name is Erica Gwynn. I'm the Area Focus WASH Manager and the RIUSAID Partnership and Program Coordinator for Rotary International. And I'll let my colleague Neil introduce himself.
Sure, I'm Neil Van Dyne. I'm the president of the E-Club of WASH, one of the directors of the Hand Wash Initiative, and a board member of the WASH Rotary Action Group. I currently am in Pion, Haiti, and have been for the last 33 years.
Yeah, so Neil and I's style is to have much more of a casual presentation. One thing that we detest at large is long drawn out PowerPoint presentations. So yes, we have a PowerPoint today to try to guide our discussion, but really we want to have this more of a conversation with you all. Today we're going to be talking about planning for scale at WASH, in WASH. And hopefully you've come to the table wanting to think more and brainstorm more about the planning process needed for scaling specifically for your projects or programs. And this is really going to build off a lot. Hopefully many of you attended Stu and Brima's breakout session that really focused on sustainability and what we need to really consider for long-lasting project outcomes, because that all feeds into this next step, or maybe a concurrent step, which is thinking about scaling. So why don't we go ahead and jump right in, and we want to say, if you have immediate questions, again, this should be a discussion. So if you have something to say, how should we do this? Should we make it known in the chat, or would it be better to go ahead and
have them drop it in the chat if they have a question, and we can stop and maybe address it as we need to.
Yeah.
And if everyone that's in person, if you just kind of want to raise your hand, I can interject for you since we don't have the chat option.
Okay, great. Great. I'm toggling between two screens, so bear with me as I figure out the fun technology on this side. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So many of you may be aware, regardless whether you're working within scaling or not, is that Rotary is now caught up to the rest of the world to start thinking about impact. And the way we can achieve true impact through our volunteer service and our volunteer service in water, sanitation, and hygiene is through scale. And we now have an official definition of scaling at Rotary Foundation that we should all be familiar with. So scaling at Rotary is considered to be an effort by Rotary members in partnership with others to increase the impact of proven approaches to work in our areas of focus so as to benefit more people and foster lasting policy and program development. So there's a lot of keywords within that little tight definition, but really, this kind of really sums up some of the things we're going to think about today. So there's a lot of different steps within scaling, but today we're going to focus on the planning that needs to be thought about. So the key things I've emphasized here in this definition are in red: partnership, increasing impact, benefiting more people, having lasting policy and program development, or what we call systems change. So everyone should be aware of that. Now, when we think, what does it mean to scale your Rotary project? We tried to put it into these 5 key pillars, and we're going to be touching upon each of these key pillars that you need to be thinking about when you're planning to scale. So it all starts with the vision to scale, right? And then within that vision, we're going to tackle each one of these pillars. So the first one is, it should be evidence-based, right? We want to have evidence-based interventions that must have already demonstrated success in affecting change. So we should be very clear of what are changes that we want to see and have that evidence readily available or acquired by the time that we are actually ready to implement scaling. Next thing is partnership engagement. This is really the engagement of external organizations and those relevant authorities, government, usually in most cases, that they're engaged and committed within the process. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more that each one of these in more detail in just a few minutes. The next one is we're building with sustainability in mind. So we don't want to just create more of something that's not going to be there for the long term. So we always want to have the foundation of our projects and program, obviously, to be built around sustainability. And Stu and Brima really went into the details of this in their session. If you weren't able to attend their session, please look over the recording of that session. They did a really great job, and they really referred a lot to the guidelines that was created within Rotary International Rotary Foundation to guide Rotarians around the standards we want upheld in regards to sustainability. And that really is based upon the systems, knowing those systems that we're working in and strengthening what's already there, right? Now, what's really unique to Rotary is this represents Rotary. We want to have scaling that represents Rotary. And that really, we'll talk a little bit more about what that means, but it's really, in a nutshell, I would say it's about leveraging those unique strengths of each Rotarian club, having them work together so that we can achieve scale with more ease. So we'll come back to that because that's a fun one to talk about. And then lastly, we need to be able to assess ourselves, not just individually, obviously, but the projects and programs we're working with. What is our readiness to grow? How ready are we? And what do we need to think about when we're thinking about readiness to grow? So this kind of will give you an overview of our talk today. And there'll be a lot of opportunities for us to throw some examples. And I think that's the best way is instead of us just talking about theory, we're going to really bring it home to you with a really key example, which is the hand wash program, which we'll introduce to you shortly.
And just a quick question. We had 2 questions in the group chat. Is this how we want to go about questions, with a polite interruption, or do you want to not have me interrupt you like this?
It's fine.
Yeah.
All right, we're doing it. So Stu wanted to know, will all Rotary Global Grants be expected to think about or actually start scaling, or will one of the global grants or will one of global grants still be approved by the Rotary Foundation?
I think I mean one-off global grants.
Yeah. Thank you. Struggle.
So Rotary Global Grants, you do not have to think about scaling, but we want to progress toward impact with all of our project work. So it's really up to the individual of those projects and the teams of those projects to be able to assess where you are with your project. What is the outcomes you really wish to achieve? What type of change do you really wish to achieve? Is it a small change in a singular school, for example? Or are we really looking to have a greater community impact for the long term? And this isn't just, by the way, this session is not just for those that have a lot of resources at their disposal, multi-million-dollar program that they're running. We even welcome those Rotary projects, or those of you who are doing global grants, even $40,000 grants, $100,000 grants. This is an opportunity, even though you may not be ready to scale right now, for you to think earlier about scaling is better than later. So it's never too late or too early to think about scaling. So we welcome all of you.
Wonderful. Chris Rossell was wondering, with programs of scale, could you present the whole set of requirements from the start? The initial presentation this year was extremely different from the final data entry fields. We did the initial planning, then the final input fields changed. Is that a question you want to get to now? Would you like to save it for the end?
Yeah, I'll put that in the parking lot because he's referring specifically to our programs of scale grant application that they must have applied to for their program. So we can talk about those specific nuances of the application system after our presentation. That would be great.
Okay. Let's keep it going.
All right.
Right. So when we talk about scaling, the biggest part of scaling, I think, is creating a clear vision because it's that vision that allows us to enroll others into that. Anything that achieves at scale requires enrolling others, and sometimes cross-connecting with larger and larger systems as you expand. Now, there's many of us that have successful WASH projects, and it's that excitement that's generated by that success, the success of a latrine in a school, or having a successful well, and the transformation of a community. And it opens up a possibility of replicating that success and impacting many, many more communities. And it becomes like a light at the end of the tunnel. And it could be as simple as the thought of like, wow, we could do this everywhere. What's critically important is really to recognize that the success at scale requires the integration of multiple systems. And on a local level, that might be the water committee or the school director or parent-teacher association. But as you start to expand, you look at the local area that might have multiple schools, or the regional area that has multiple water systems. And sometimes if you're going to scale it out nationally, you're interacting with the national government authorities and the waterline ministries. Sergio spoke to this, these kind of overlapping systems in his keynote earlier, and Brima and Stu interacted with that, with the circuit rider program, which is another system that you interact with water system maintenance. And effectively expressing that kind of grand vision can be a really powerful tool for engaging and enrolling these other entities, these higher level entities. A linear vision would be like, where is the next school? How do we get to the next school or well? And a grander vision is, how do we get this to every school or every community? And if you have, say, an interesting training technique that might be really, really scalable, if you could have them, say, the Ministry of Education push out a hand washing song to all the schools across the country. You simply need to interact with that circle and that level system to do that. But stepping back and asking yourselves those kind of bigger questions can often might be, oops, Erica, you're making me lose my notes here. Okay, we're good. And so for us, and Erica has hand wash up there, for hand wash in Haiti, the conversation moved from, we have this really neat methodology that systematically generates sustainable wash services in rural villages. And how do we start to cover every village in the district? And then how do we create access to every household in the country? What would that look like? And to that end, it led to the creation of Hand Wash, the Haitian National Clean Water Sanitation and Hygiene Strategy. And it's a multi-decade program at an estimated cost of $2.3 billion with this crazy audacious goal of providing clean water and satisfactory sanitation to the entire nation of Haiti. Now, this requires enrolling district and national water ministries, local officials, nonprofit organizations, and Rotarians under some umbrella structure called Hand Wash that's focused on using a set of core values, data-driven decision-making, sustainability, and local engagement. And for that, we have local Rotarians leading the way, using their advocacy to engage, help collect information in each community, gradually, iteratively, systematically, bringing that data into existence for the various authorities who oversee and are part of that hierarchical system. Sergio's set of tools for the aquifers and the cross-connecting aquifers is another example of a really high-level system that can be interacted with to scale. Go ahead, Erica, the next slide. For that, and those kind of tools are what speak to the evidence that needs to be built. Pilot programs, demonstrations. And within Hand Wash, we have multiple solutions. There's no single best solution. It's not just borehole wells or biosand filters or water systems or wash in schools. It's a whole set of solutions that get integrated according to the various partners under the umbrella. And the guiding use of this is to use the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal levels, to drive alignment, using their levels of basic access. If they have it within 500 meters or a 30-minute round trip, they have functional potable water, then they have basic access. The second level and highest level being safely managed, where people actually have access within their yard, at the tap in their yard, to functional potable piped water. And these solutions are economically based on population density. They make more economic sense in urban, densely populated areas to deliver piped water networks. As you get to the rural areas, you start to look at water points, or even at the end of the line, individual household water treatment, if it's more efficient and effective. So what types of evidence do you need to have for that? Things that support the value and feasibility of scaling up the model. In our program in Handwash, we systematized a successful training program that really creates 90% of the infrastructure functional after 15 years. Pay for service and potable functional water. That model works within the existing governance, the existing cultural and social parameters of the community, and it's supplemented through professional operators. We looked to any data that existed on that and generated that data where it didn't exist on the cost effectiveness of the model. Using M-Water, as Megan talked about earlier, creating a monitoring and evaluation system that allows us to collect longitudinal data over time, bringing that data into existence for the different levels, the different systems that we have to interact with, from the local government from the water committee to the local government to the regional and national government. That allows us to get insight onto what it means to have basic access, establishing life cycle costing and revenue streams for operations and maintenance. For the urban piped water systems, we're really just at the infancy component of that. Whereas where do we start to collect that kind of data on operational 24-hour pressurized water systems? And it creates, in this world, any evidence that establishes the demand for and applicability of the model outside of the pilot area. We often have a really powerful leader at one school or one village that allows that village to shift and transform. The trick to scaling is, how do you do that regularly and systematically across different geographic areas and different cultural and social areas? So you can ask yourself, do you have all the relevant stakeholders available? What other potential partners might be there? Beneficiaries, and who else perceives a need for this? Has your model been well documented, including documenting the processes that create it? And is it cost effective and objectively assessed? Does that evidence indicate that the model is more cost effective than other approaches? Because being able to compare those different strategies and solutions against each other allows you to fit them into the scalable vision.
That's right. And that's important, right, Neil? Because I would say oftentimes as Rotarians, if we're introduced or get to know a particular technology really well, we tend to hold on to that really strongly, right? And we want to see everybody to have an opportunity for this particular technology. But that may not be the best technology or innovation or even intervention for outside of the particular community you're working in. And that's something we really need to think about when Neil's talking about comparative impact. All right. So hopefully you guys are taking notes. And if you have any, hopefully you guys are all taking notes. And if you have any specific questions along the way for any one of these steps, please just shout out or put your questions in the chat box. You're going to have to interrupt me because I don't have a viewing of the chat room at the same time. So the next step we want to think about is the method. So we've defined our vision. What is the change we really wish to see? As Neil just talked about, we are collecting evidence through pilot projects, demonstration projects, and really looking for not just any evidence of the change that we're seeing, but those specific three levels of evidence that we really should be collecting and pulling together. The next step is really looking at the methods. How will scaling up be accomplished? And there's three major ways, right? We have expansion, we have replication, and collaboration. Each one of these words are self-explanatory, but I do want to focus specifically on expansion, because expansion tends to be what most Rotarians think about when they're thinking about scaling. So when we think about expansion, what does that really mean? So it's really important to think about, what is it that we're trying to accomplish here with scaling? Are we expanding our geographic coverage, expanding to new locations? Are we expanding the breadth of the coverage? For example, are we reaching more people in the currently served groups and areas? So maybe we had a specific target population, but now we're reaching additional, maybe more vulnerable populations within the community that we're working in. Again, are we expanding by giving services to new target populations? That can be outside the community, it can be within another district, but what's really important is to be able to define for ourselves, because without these boundaries or these definitions, we end up getting very, very big in scope with our vision. So we really want to take, what is our first step for scaling? What is a feasible scaling goal for us? And when we talk about expansion, what are we really talking about? So that really helps us to focus our planning efforts. Now, these aren't exclusive of one another. Oftentimes, like for example, in the case of hand wash, they actually are taking all three of these methods and combining them. They're expanding beyond one commune to 7 different communes. They're replicating a model, which what Neil shared with you is a revenue generation model, especially for water supply. That's their first focus, is water supply. And they're also strengthening the capacity of management systems, making it a semi-professional model. And then their collaboration, well, they know that they can't do this with volunteers alone. They really need to expand the collaboration between government agencies. And as we all know, WASH is not housed oftentimes in just one single government agencies. It's often divided, especially if we're working in healthcare facilities, where we've got to think about the ministries of health or district health officers. If we're working in schools, we can't forget about the Ministry of Education and district education offices. The list goes on and on. So we need to be very focused with our vision. All right. And we're going to move on now to talking more about partnership engagement and how that directly ties in with sustainability. Neil, I'm going to pass this one to you.
Okay,
a little bit more of organizational roles.
Yeah. So what's been interesting as we've grown hand wash, specifically creating it as an umbrella to pull in partners. So when we look at these organizations, you find that many organizations have expertise in one part of the conversation. They might be good at drilling wells, or they might be good at training, or they might be good at filters. But everyone tries to make it go on their own and winds up having to be good across every portion of that. And so by pulling inside a grand vision, by pulling those partners in, it allows the opportunity to bring these partners together and have them complement each other rather than compete against each other. So for instance, in one of the communes where we're working, we had water missions as an organization come in and say, we have an interesting water evidence-based system set and a lot of data around that. We were able to say, well, tell us where your system works best. And by doing that, we were able to spatially visualize where their solution might work best across the entire country. It allows us to see where boreholes are an effective solution and where water systems are an effective solution. And it creates a guide to help align these various organizations. So in terms of organizations and those resources, by complementing each other, you allow everyone to be an expert at what they're good at. Now, that also requires that we interact with the communities. That means the local government, the regional government, and the Ministry of Water. And depending on what extent you're scaling, you need to consider which systems that you're engaging and which partners need to be enrolled. The biggest mistake you can make is trying to assume that you have all of the solutions and that you're going to be able to do this on your own. Because any sustainable framework has got to be scalable. That's going to be scalable, is going to be based on evidence, and it's going to integrate with whatever systems are already there. So as we progress, we clarify the roles and responsibilities for ourselves as Handwash, for the organizations that work with us, and even the government entities, the mayor. How does the mayor fit into this conversation? How does the regulatory body fit into this conversation? And clarifying these roles and responsibilities is key for making the whole system stronger and functional. And that's what really allows the scaling to occur. Go ahead.
That's excellent. Thank you, Neil. And I just want to point out that what Neil's talking about is really what we do best in Rotary, which is bringing multiple partners and stakeholders together at the same table and trying to unite people in a vision. We know this because we know this is a strength because we can look at the evidence of polio, right? So why should it be any different for water, sanitation, and hygiene? Too often or not, we're so project focused, which means, okay, I have this one particular project. Who's going to help me implement it? Let me get the endorsement of the government and let me get going with this project. But when we're thinking about scaling, we need to be thinking much larger. Again, we have a much larger vision. So that means that we're not going to have to think about those organizations or entities within government that maybe weren't so heavily involved with our one particular project in a school or 5 schools. Now, if we want to work in 100 schools or schools that are in different districts or different counties, we're going to be having to think a little bit more about different organizational layer within governments and organizations to bring them together. All right. Thank you, Neil. We're going to go ahead and speak to one of the most exciting, which really makes this the Rotary side of scaling. And everyone asks me, oh, what does that mean to Rotarize scaling? So let's talk about that, right? Rotary has a unique position. And when we talk about whether it's our formal granting program, which is called Programs of Scale, or just scaling in general in WASH, it's important for us to think about, first and foremost, what is Rotary's role within the implementation of the program, but also what is Rotary's role to ease the burden of scaling? So there's a lot of challenges that arise if we really want to expand, if we want to replicate, and if we want to improve and increase in our collaboration. It's Rotary that has the ability to help bring down barriers, oftentimes, that arise with any organization that wants to scale. So what is that? I often get asked, tell me, Erica, how should Rotarians function to help us to scale? My answer to you is, you tell me, because you are the Rotarians in the field, and each one of you have different strengths in different areas of the world. And I'll give you an example. For example, I work with a large program in Uganda. The Ugandan Rotarians have incredible connections. They are ministers of water. They are in high leadership positions within sanitation. They're business owners of major supply chains that feed into the water and sanitation sector. And they're also development professionals, many of them. So they're in a unique position, not only as Rotarians, but Rotarians that can act as the voices and advocates for being able to put WASH as the priority agenda to overcome just fragmented project implementation, which plagues many, many countries of the world. There's an opportunity for the voices of the unheard to come through and be brought to the forefront by Rotarians themselves. So they're in a unique position because, and during national working groups or district assembly meetings where they're already in attendance, they also have the ears of key decision makers to bring them on board. Neil had just talked about the importance of trying to bring everybody with a single vision, or at least align visions somewhat around what you want to do with scaling. And the Rotarians in Uganda are in a really unique position to be able to do that. However, my colleagues and friends over in Ghana don't necessarily have those same positions within government, or specifically with the water and sanitation sector. However, they're incredibly present within the communities that they're working in. And so they're working more at the district levels or the local government levels to be able to bring communities and government officials together to be able to work out stronger system changes. For example, monitoring programs. We see a lot of absent monitoring officers going out to small rural communities where they should be. But Rotarians are now able to see that, recognize those gaps, and recognizing in order to bring something to scale and for it to be sustainable, the Rotarians are there to really facilitate the dialogue between communities and district assemblymen or decision makers, essentially, to help to strengthen those systems that Neil had talked about. So each area in the world is different. And what does that mean? That means that we need clubs and districts to have, first of all, a unified vision. This can't all be led by a single individual in a club, and very difficult to actually scale a program with a single club. So in order to get that sort of unity, just like we talked about with organizations, we need to look in-house at our own Rotary family. Do we have the unity of vision within Haiti, for example, to be able to say, okay, what is our vision for scale, for bringing water and sanitation to all of Haiti under this model? And we need to start there first. And that sometimes means that we need to pull everyone together and talk about how can we have this be a continued vision, right? It also helps, I love to say this, is do some housekeeping. See what are our strengths in your own backyard. For example, in Colorado, one of the biggest strengths is you have a lot of professionals that are leaders within key WASH organizations that are based in Colorado and of the universities. That's a huge strength. Have you ever thought of how that could be collectively utilized for larger scaled programming? And we can also think about what are some of the other strengths that you may have overlooked. Have we done an inventory of really what's coming up the pipeline in Rotary, Colorado, for example? So this is really an exciting opportunity, but it has to start with you. And it's unique for each region of the world.
Erica, we should probably move along. We're only halfway through. We'll speed it up a little bit.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Neil, because we're running, as you know, a little bit late. And we want, some people have put questions in the chat. So if you guys can wrap it up in about 10 minutes, that'd be great.
Okay. Yeah, that works great. So let me go ahead and I think we'll go ahead to Neil to talk about the importance of scaling of once we do this type of look at what we have and where we want to go, we're going to identify gaps along the way.
Yeah, so I'll expand on what Erica was just talking about. It's really key and important to engage the Rotary clubs across the geographic area that you're looking to scale, because those are your partners. Those are the businessmen, the leaders the people focused on service that are going to help deliver what you need to at scale and help you interact with those larger scale systems. And one way that we used to engage that was through building a huge data set to bring the magnitude of the challenge into existence for them. We used MWater to go out and physically map every water point across the country. And as you can see here, draw a circle, a geographic circle around it that represents a 30-minute round trip. And the little black dots that you can see on your screen are the houses. So by doing that, it brings into existence for everybody, the mayor, the Rotarians, the National Water Agency, who has access to water in the green circles, whose infrastructure is broken in the yellow, and who's drinking contaminated water in the red. So it's a really powerful and effective tool for enrolling not just Rotarians and elected officials, but our other partners, UNICEF, the World Bank, and so on. So, and while you don't have the resources of hand wash, maybe, what would that look like for a Rotary Club to do something like that? If you're going to scale it out, how many schools are there? How many healthcare facilities are there? These are some ways that you can do that. So,
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Erica. That evidence-based conversation, you can go into this, right? Helps you see what's there and where there's success. Tying it into the systems that are existing allows you to have that data come at you longitudinally over time on a monthly or quarterly or even an annual basis if need be, and allows you to look at the weaknesses in the systems in the hierarchy, make it locally relevant. It helps build it out. It helps with the sustainability. It creates a really strong program logic to have that integrated monitoring, evaluation, and kind of collaborative learning going on. And it's easy to engage Rotarians in that because the Rotary members can see that, and that they're lawyers and doctors and in these areas that can help influence and advocate for changes on the systems level. That's part of this. And you have all these pieces in place, then you start to think about how you're ready to scale and how you're ready to grow and which stakeholders and systems need to be engaged to bring that benefit to it. Or if you're going to move into a new geographic area, how do you piggyback on that work that you've learned in one area and the systems you've built there to bring it to a new community or a new group of people?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And this really goes this really needs to be evidence-based from the very beginning, from your demonstration and pilot projects to also how are you going to demonstrate success, not only with the impacts of the services you're providing, but also the success of scaling your model. So think a lot about what are those monitoring indicators, how are you going to actually be able to tell your story through evidence that this model is successfully being scaled. Now, the fun part here is we're going to talk about readiness to scale. And this is a big one. And unfortunately, we're out of time. So we're going to make this quite truncated. But everyone should have access to a PDF file that is hopefully going to be sent out to all of you. And this comes from the MSI Scaling Up Toolkit. It's an excellent toolkit, by the way, and we'll give you these resources at the end of the presentation. So what does this mean, assessing my readiness to scale? We've confirmed we have the buy-in, we want to do this, but are we ready to do it? Is this the time? What do I need to think about? So what are the three key areas? We need to think about operations, right? Are there obvious economies of scale that we have within our model? So is this going to be affordable, right? Do we need funding in order to have this be of large scale? Or is funding going to be internally generated by the model? This is very, very important. And as we know, money tends to make a lot of these activities possible. So we have to think about that from the get-go. Second thing is capacity. Now we need to think not only of human capital and organizational capacity of who all our organizations are that we're working with. For example, are Rotarians capable of working at scale, the scale that we have defined? Or are they really pulled as it is for our singular project we're doing right now in Washington schools? Do they have very little time to truly engage? So what would be a more effective model? Do we need to supplement our volunteer service with professional staff? A professional project manager is almost a must-have with any project that's thinking about scaling. I would encourage a monitoring and evaluation specialist. Bring those people on board to help supplement the Rotary service that you're doing. We also need to think about the capacity of the organizations and governments that we're working with. Is our model too grandiose, really, for the capacity of the local government to take on? Obviously, true successful scaling is going to be passing along the model to somebody else, a more permanent entity, and that would be most likely government. So we need to really think about what's the capacity of the local government. For example, in Haiti, we know that they have a monitoring and evaluation system, but the actual implementation of that system is still fairly in its infancy. So recognizing that, we really need to focus on how do we work together to strengthen the capacity within these more permanent institutions to make scaling easier and more probable. So these are some of the things when we think of capacity that should be coming to our mind. The next thing is, I talked about this a little bit, is social context. So how easily, for example, can the institutions that we've been working with, we may have worked with a district education officer, but were the characteristics, their leadership capabilities, their mobilization efforts, was that unique really only to that particular district? Or is that reflective really of the larger education authority? So if we were to expand to other communities or expand to other districts, can we expect the same type of support and engagement from that education authority? For example, if we were doing Washington schools.
Erica, if you let me chime in here.
Yep.
If you could let me chime in. You know, one of the more interesting things that's happened with Handwash has been because the Rotary clubs across the country are enrolled in this grand vision. They have an opportunity to volunteer their services within their area of expertise. So while the club in Port-au-Prince might not be engaged directly in the geographic area, because they're enrolled in this larger vision, the lawyer who's the past president has an opportunity to share his skill set to influence things on a national scale. The engineer and businessman in Leogan has an opportunity to leverage his skills. And it's really unique in that they are the ones, they're inside the social context, they're inside the country, and they're influencing their fellow citizens, which is really, really powerful.
Yeah. So those are the questions we really need to be thinking about, especially that last one. Is there anything special or unique about the social or political context or the general circumstances of the pilot project that would need to be present for the model to be replicated elsewhere successfully? So we really need to think about what made that successful at a smaller scale, and is that going to be in place and elsewhere? All right. So oftentimes I get, Erica, this is great, but it's still too high in the sky for me. How do I put this in terms of practical application in my project? So as I said, one of the toolkits that I really recommend you turn to is the MSI toolkit. Rotary has also created a toolkit for programs of scale that has pulled from certain aspects, but I really recommend the MSI toolkit for scaling up. in that we have what's called the Scaling Assessment Tool Checklist. And this is a really great way to take all of the themes that Neil and I just covered, which are called model categories here in this green column. Takes all of the topics we talked about and puts them in a question form. And then you and your team should really be sitting down and then being able to assess, you know, am I meeting this so that scaling up is easier? Or am I not meeting this particular question so that it'll actually make scaling up harder here in column C? Or maybe things are not so black and white. And it looks like we're closing up in 115 seconds. All right, so I just wanted to give you an idea, an overview of what this—
That document is in the chat.
Yeah, the document's in the chat, and it's a really great tool for you to look at things like such as credibility, how observable are the model's results, how adaptable is it to other contexts, how prepared are you operationally to take this and expand it not only within Rotary, but with their partner organizations that you're looking at. And I would love for you to, as homework, to be able to take this and go through this. You know, start with yourself first, to start going through this checklist to say, where am I? Where are most of these checks falling in? What do I need to improve upon? There's no right answer of when you can scale, but what this does tell you is how easy it's going to be to scale. And that's what we want to aim for, is more of simplicity, because the simpler something is, the more adaptable it is, and it's more likely to be successful. So this is really, really a great tool. I wish we could go into it a little bit more, and that's what our activity was, but unfortunately we're out of time. But I wanted to thank all of you. This gives an overview of the planning process, and wanted to see if anyone has any questions.
We have 18 seconds left. Would you guys mind if I sent out your presentation?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you guys so much. We have 6 seconds left, so we'll see you downstairs.
All right. Thank you, everyone.